Thank you. I just wanted to just sure already started early late on this. I want to get started. This is AI agents, thought-provoking, I just want to start out. Thank you again to our sponsors. Much appreciated for having facilities and being able to have such a great event. So I'm going to start out just by telling you kind of the different things that give away the key things here. But basically, we're going to talk about 80-20 rule. Basically, you're going to supply the motion with AI agents, and then really overall, the key thing that I want to communicate is caution about using AI agents. I'm all for using AI agents, and I'm supportive of them, but I also want, one of my key points here is to be aware of the limitations and why they do require caution. Thank you. So let's start out with what are AI agents? I've asked a lot of people this. I ask people this a lot because there's so many different definitions out there, and it's a very broad term. For the sake of what I'm doing, I don't want to say AI actors, but when I'm talking about AI agents, I'm using a relatively broad term, but it's not just AI, but AI that's taking an action, that's doing something. So taking a prompt or a suggestion and then acting on that beyond just giving a response or answer. But it does apply, a lot of what I'm going to talk about applies in those cases as well, with just AI chat agents. So beginning of the story is I have used Duolingo and was trying to, I wanted to build an app to do what I wanted with language. And I couldn't find anything in the other tools that were out there, and so I said I'll try something on my own. I actually went on a trip and learned some Swahili, and one of the things that I learned after the fact was that there were really only certain phrases that I needed, and I just wanted an app to do it, kind of some basic functionality that the other ones weren't doing. And in this age, one of the benefits of AI and AI agents is the fact that you can build some of these tools on your own, rather than using the sources that are out there. So I wanted to build something different. So I use Replit, and also use different chat tools that are out there. I have Claude in parentheses. I did not use Claude. That's considered probably one of the better ones for coding, but I did play around with the other ones. But I'm on there because an important part of this entire process was me. The AI agent did not do, and I'll get into that in a second, did not do everything that I wanted and hoped. And but it was a good experience. So it was easy to a point. So as I said in my pitch, when I went and I spent a fair amount of time on my prompt, because I knew that prompting is important when you're working with AI. In retrospect, I didn't spend enough time. If I were to go and do it again, I would spend even more time on my prompt, queuing up the right prompt to get it. But even there would be a lot of limitations. So I gave it the prompt, what I wanted, how I wanted it, tried to give it some structure, and it went through and did that, asked a couple other questions, and in 20 minutes, I had an application. I was pretty impressed with what the application was. Here's just some pieces of it. But it was an application that worked well on mobile, it worked well on, it looked good on mobile, it looked good on a desktop, and on first pass, it did several things that I wanted to do, which is great. But then, that's where things started going a little awry. I started asking it certain questions, or asking certain things like, hey, I noticed this, can you just make this adjustment? And it would make the adjustment, but it would do something else that I didn't want. Or in one case, I asked it to make a change, and it spent several minutes processing it, and then came back and it didn't change anything. And I asked it again in a different prompt, and it came back and didn't change that thing that I wanted again. I was getting very frustrated. And then I hit the limit of my token usage for the day, and I'm like, okay. You're taking almost all the way there, and now I gotta wait or I gotta pay. Like that's almost a scam at that point. But so just to give you an idea of how, we're not gonna get too much into the app itself, but the idea was that I wanted an application that would go and I could take certain key topics that were just topics that I would use on a regular use case if I was using the language, and it would build lesson plans, it would run the lesson, give me different, where I can select different options, and then I could go, look up words and also chat about and ask questions about it. So several different pieces to that. So basically when I had it working, it was working with a few cases, but it didn't have the login. It did ask me if I wanted to do the login at the beginning, but I figured that might really, I've done logins with applications in the past, and that takes a long time. So I was like, I don't want to get caught in just trying to log into something and not do the basic functionality. So it didn't have a login, didn't have the database behind it, didn't have any integration to the AI pieces that I wanted to have in there. It didn't have, it didn't generate new lessons like I wanted it to do out of the get-go. It didn't separate the front-end piece from the back-end piece, which created a big problem later on in the process, and I'll get to that. And several pieces that were working were really just placeholders for what I wanted to do, and there was a lot more to be done with this usable app as I wanted to use it. So one of the things that I'm going to start out with, just as the benefits of this is, you're talking about wireframes, or someone who was talking about wireframes a minute ago. It was fantastic for getting to something that was functioning and be able to start poking around with it. I don't think I haven't used wireframe tools myself in my current job, but even if I was in that place, I don't think I would use a wireframe tool anymore. I think I would use AI to go build something out because it's usable, it's workable, it does the things. So it would be great for that case. It's great for a first version of something. Kind of the base version to work on, knowing the limitations of what it's going to have. And it's a similar comment, but it's a great starting point. It's a great place to begin with. But there are lots of issues and caveats after that point. So tweaking was the biggest thing. So I just did this as an example of, rather than get into the code and trying to explain what the tweaking of the code, I just asked AI to do an image, and then I noticed that when I was doing this house of cards, it didn't really do an ace of hearts properly. So I just said, hey, can you fix that ace of hearts? And this is what it came back with. It didn't fix it, it just added an ace of hearts on there. And I bring this up as an example because this is exactly the type of thing that happens in the coding environment too. It's I just need you to go fix this, and it would go do something else over here, and it wouldn't fix the core issue. And even in times when I started going back and looking at the code, and I know coding, so I'd go in and say, okay, can you go fix this section of code? And it wouldn't do it. And I'm like, okay, I know what the fix is here, so at this point, I'm just gonna go make the fix myself, rather than having you do it, because it's getting frustrating. As I mentioned, earlier, I burned through 4 of my requests asking it to do something. Just make this simple change, and I don't know what it was thinking it was doing, but it would even come back and say, so you want me to change this to this and this to this, and I'd say, yes, exactly, and then it wouldn't do any of those things. And you've probably seen that, that's, again, why this image is a good example, is that's the kind of thing. Tweaking an image is really frustrating, and it does not do that well at this point in time. Minor adjustments were all but impossible for me, and then several things just weren't exactly how I would have wanted that to be. Another example, and I think I might talk about this later too, but is I asked it to do a change for me, and it came back and said, okay, it was this really long response, and I was thinking, okay, this is like a 2-line in code fix. I think I even know where to fix it. And it came back with a really long, complex change that changed like 5 different modules. And I was like, whoa, like what are you doing? And I questioned it. And it said, well, you should do these for these reasons. And then I said, well, that doesn't make sense because we're doing this. And it said, oh, you're right. You're absolutely right. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it's like, here's the 2 lines you need to change. So it took me down this road of making major changes to multiple modules. And I knew enough to say, well, that change was not that's not the right answer. Now, the danger with an AI agent is that if you're asking for something and you have no visibility into what it's happening, you don't know that it's making those kind of assumptions and saying, well, he asked this, I'm going to do these 50 things over here. So you really need to have an understanding of what's happening behind the scenes with all that. So yeah, this gets into the 4 choices that it was making. The 4 sections of changes that I wanted to make as opposed to just 4 lines of code. With that is technical debt. I mentioned earlier the front end versus the back end. And when it built it, even though I said and gave it parameters to say I want this to be a modular build and I keep things separate and I want to be able to deploy things separate, it still essentially ignored that, or maybe there's something else in my prompt that overrode that, or I don't know what it was, but it kept it as one big section of code. After I was done with the kind of using that AI agent tool, I was like, yeah, I'm going to develop the rest of this using AI kind of as a guide. I'm going to take the code and put it in. Well, that was a huge process to just move that out and then break it up and piece it, and that was a lot of technical debt that could have been avoided. Again, part of it is on me of giving it a different prompts or whatnot, but I was expecting a little bit more, especially since I had already said I want to break up this code from the beginning, and it still lumped it together, and I spent a lot of time separating it apart from the back end. So there was that, a lot of technical debt. The other thing is that the memory is questionable. So I stayed in the same context with all the requests, and I talked to it about, here's what I want this to do, here's all the different pieces, and it came back at several times. There was, I can't remember the exact case, but there was something where I was like, whoa, why are you doing that? Like, that's not how we already talked about this, and you built it for this perspective based on us doing this. And that's where it came back to you're right to correct me, I forgot to consider that design request. Well, that was an important design request, and it just started going off in another direction on that. So if I had not been there and been paying attention to exactly what it was trying to do, I don't know where that would have gone from there. And again, it's not always the best. It's like, your suggestion is better than, I'm like, well, I'm actually, in one case, it was like, I'm doing what you said to do a few sections up above. Like, that is your suggestion, but it didn't remember that. So even though these things are in context windows, and you get a little technical here, the context window is what the AI knows, what has all been discussed beforehand. And it's part of the thread that gets fed into AI. But for every question, you can't assume that just because it's in that context window that it's going to be considered for that question. It's still going to parse that context window down to the parts of the context window that it thinks are relevant for that moment, which is where you have these memory lapses. That part of that context window didn't get considered at this point in time, and so it lapses. And then, so you just need to be careful, and I question the memory side of things. The other thing that was more funny with this than anything is that it comes back to this one was the one that this is the funny one. It asked me to, it said it wanted to do something, and I didn't know why I wanted to do it. So I asked, well, can you explain why we're doing this change? Because that doesn't make sense to me. So it explained it to me, and then it said, and so now can you send me this code? And I said, but I still have a question, like, why are we, you said this, and you said, and so we went through several exchanges back and forth where it's explaining, and by the third or fourth time, it said, please, like, And then this is actually not me, but one of my friends was working with Claude, or actually, that probably should be Claude. I think he was working with Claude, and it responded to something he was having to do, saying, this is a perfect example of overly engineered. Okay, so the commentary. So this isn't just that tool that I was using. This is actually the business of all AI at this point. And you need to be very cautious. It extends to any type of thing that where you have an AI driving a action on the back end. I'm encouraging all of you to be skeptical with anything that's happening. I'm not saying don't use them. I think we should and we will be and should be using them. But you cannot use them blindly. They're going to go off in random directions for good and bad reasons. So it does extend to all different types. So I sound like I'm being all doom and gloom. You've heard all these different things of vibe coding's dead, projects are failing. Yes, I think that there are issues. This is the one that probably scares me the most. Oh, it's only a 1 in 4 chance that things are going to go really bad. Don't worry about that. So I do not think it's as bad as a lot of those, but I do think it will be very helpful. I do think it will improve. But even with the improvements, I think that there's going to be caveats to that. And whether we like it or not, it is part of our lives at the moment. So it's a matter of how do we work with this most effectively. So kind of wrapping up the things, and then I'll open up to questions, and I can dig into some more detail after that. Agents, actors, however you want to do it. Look at it. Any type of AI that is driving and creating an output is what I'm talking about here. They require supervision. The 80-20 rule. It got a lot of things done in that first 20 minutes of what it did. If I had tried to build that 20-minute piece myself, I think and I'm being generous to myself on this, I think it probably would have taken me a month and a half to get that first iteration done. And it did a much better job at that. It got me really far. And I got overly optimistic after that because I'm like, wow, if it got me this far after 20 minutes, this is going to be fantastic. And then I spent, I don't know how much time asking it to do the same thing, little tweaks over and over again, and it wasn't doing it. That's very frustrating. So there is an 80-20 rule of in the first 20% of your time, you're going to get 80% of work, and then the rest of it's going to take a long time. Choices that it made, a lot of them were great, but many of them were suspect. I mentioned at the beginning also, I showed you that I was using several different agents. There were times that I got stuck with one agent. So I used Gemini probably the most for my development, and it had the most information. But there were times that it just could not hit me over hurdle, and it would just keep trying over and over again. So I'd go to ChatGPT and ask its opinion on how to do it. And sometimes ChatGPT would come up with the answer, sometimes it would be Copilot that would come up with the answer. I think in a lot of cases, none of them answered, but between the three of them, I was like, oh, wait a minute, I think it helped me get to the answer just by getting essentially a second opinion to look at it. The memory, I mentioned that. Memory is questionable, and then just be ready for attitude coming from that. I'd really like to understand the dynamics of where that attitude actually comes from. Especially, somehow it's in there, but there is that. Well, that's another thing we can talk about in a minute. Let me pause there and see what questions, comments people have.
So overall, you have the use cases could be, I want a production-ready app in the end of this. Right? That's one use case. Another use case is I want to prototype something so that I can feedback or whatever. Right? If you want the latter one, how do you get to the former one, fully productionized app or product? are you better off getting your 80%, getting 80% there, throwing it away, and then giving it to a team of human developers? Or are you better off trying to get that last 20% somehow?
So it's slightly, it wouldn't be either one of the, I'd say I'm a big believer in, I'm gonna throw out a term that means a million different things too, but microservices. And building out components and that can work together. So rather than trying to, if I was building this language app, I was building it for myself. But if I was building it for production to sell as an application, I would have thought ahead of time and probably using AI as a guide for how can I break this up into the different pieces that are part of this. And I would design each of those as its independent entity. And then I would use AI to build that out with a lot of guardrails and guidance along the way where it's doing this one part of the app, knowing that it will then plug into that. I would not try and build any type of monolithic app, certainly because you're going to get into all the same issues with traditional development.
So build the modules, and then the human puts them together.
Well, it doesn't have to be human. The system can, so, MCP is a great example. Like MCP is a way to have AI agents use tools. So, and it's a lot, an MCP is a lot like an API. I would build these different modules with MCP components where they could be used by an AI.
So then a human stitches them together in MCP.
No, they're just sitting out there. And actually, MCP, the AI would be tapping into those. But those components are small and simple enough that they do one thing and they do one thing well. They're like a AI agent, well, they're an AI-enabled agent. It's a tool that can do something very specific that can be used by AI and it will use AI itself. Yes?
Do you see some of these AI solutions performing better than another ones like Copilot, Gemini, ChatGPT? I ran into the same instance you had. In this case, Copilot was doing fine, and last night you told me out with the same experience you had.
Yeah. So they all have different strengths and weaknesses, but they don't even change from one version to the next. I mean, they can change from one version to the next. ChatGPT 4, had certain strengths that ChatGPT 5 may or may not have those same ones. And a lot of it comes down to the prompt. Of how it's prompted and the context that's around it on how a certain agent will respond. So when I went to, let's say, asking Gemini a question, how to answer that question, and it just wasn't answering. I actually, in another case, I went to I created a new chat window and asked the same question, and I got a different answer. And the reason for that is the original one had the context from all our other discussions that it was trying to bake into the question versus just asking the question outright, unimpeded by all this other weight of everything else. It could answer it slightly differently. So it's hard to really gauge the AI or the model itself and say this model is better at this because there's so many other factors that come into play. I will say that I know a lot of people that use Claude. I did not use Claude, but I've heard good things about that. But again, some of those quotes were from a Claude user, so there are pros and cons with that. But the other thing I'd say is that going to the other chat agents is also helpful for me because it forces me to question, okay, what am I really trying to address here? What's the actual issue? What's the core issue? And kind of rephrasing it myself, asking another agent and getting its own perspective, coming back saying, okay, wait, I didn't think about that. It's approaching it from this angle. And so that's why, I can't say there was one agent that was perfect at this. Gemini did well for most of it. the actual code, 90% of it, I'd say was exceptional, or better than I would have ever done. Yeah, you just have to pay attention to what it's doing in supervisor.
I have a question. So, based on everything that you're saying, do you think agentic AI, as they call it, having one agent validate and take the output of the first agent and then reprocessing it and having that loop of agents is the way to go, or you always need a human in the loop at the end of it?
So a couple things I want to address there. The human in the loop and also the
Agentic AI.
chain.
Yeah, the chain.
The chain, that's actually, this is a fallacy of the chain is very dangerous.
Oh.
What I propose is that having these tools that you can go to a tool and get a simple answer, that it's an expert in that very specific thing. The problem with a chain is if you have a AI agent that is 90%, like it answers the question or does its job 90% of the time. If you have a chain of those, it's going to be 90% times 90% times 90% times 90%, which your end output is likely to be about 56% or whatever. I think the math on that, but your output will actually be much worse than just saying going to one agent and say do all this for me, where it might have a 70% chance. So be careful with the chain.
Okay.
I think it's, and then I don't think it always will need to have human intervention. But there needs to be some check. Like we've been starting to implement in some of our projects a QA that just goes and says, hey, did something seem to go off the rails here? And that's the time that would alert a human saying, hey, we got this back from the AI agent. This may or may not be right, and where someone can go and look at it. Anything that matters, I think at this point in time, I would not let AI do anything that matters. For many reasons, without some form of human supervision of the process. But all you're trying to do is minimize that amount of human time.
Thank you.
What's a reasonable amount of time to invest in developing an agent? I have many ideas, but when I start doing them, I need to do this, I need to do that, I need to look for a Jira integration, I need to look for the right tool, and by the time I spend like 3-4 hours on it, I'm kind of demotivated. I'll be honest. What's the right time?
This is where basic product management skills really kick in, right? What's the MVP? What's the most, what's a key component here? Try and break that down into pieces that you can get those pieces. And this is why, I was talking about the modular, is if you can find, here's 20 things that this thing really needs to do. Here are the 20 different pieces. Well, go build one of them and build it right, and build it so that it can do that thing. And if it's simple enough, it shouldn't take that long to do, right? If it's trying to achieve a very simple objective, and when it's called, it does that, and within its realm, it responds great. Get that working. You're not going to have the entire thing working, but then you can build on that, and hopefully you can reuse that component for other pieces.
Thank you.
And then as you develop, like, you need a new AI, you're going to use a new model or whatnot, this still can be independent. Maybe this is working fine with the model that it's on. You can use that for the next 5 years without having to change it.
Thanks.
Yes.
Have you gotten into evals at all?
No. I've heard of them, but I don't even know. Have you?
I've not. I've just been kind of observing other people who have.
Yeah.
The basic idea is you are kind of creating almost like unit tests for steps in your sort of agentic workflow.
Right.
That are sort of checking each step of the way for sane output.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was saying with the QA, that an agent that can essentially supervise another agent, that it is kind of a test, but it's not just it's not in the traditional sense of a unit test where you do it before you deploy, but it's something that's evaluating on a regular basis. And, checking in on all the responses that you give for the understanding that if this is 90% effective, this QA hopefully should catch it most of those times in that 10%, that is not effective and say, hey, there might be an issue with that answer as it's in, actual use.
So I had to build a prototype in Replit, and I said 60% was existing functionality and 40% was new, and they wanted it all together just to tell a full story.
Yeah.
And to get to 60% of existing functionality, I found it to be very painful.
Yeah.
I don't know, is that something that you've run into or any kind of tips? 'Cause I ended up using Replit just getting the concepts of the existing functionality. It was like copy this.
Yep.
And to your point, you can get it to 80%, but to get, that 20% just took an extraordinary amount of time.
Yeah.
Any suggestions? Or do you even recommend not doing it for
Well, I think it's the expectations that you have coming out of it. Like, I wouldn't go into Replit and say, I'm gonna use this for build out this massive application, especially on a very simple plan, because it might even go and build exactly what you want. So on the odd chance it builds exactly what you want, but to go in and modify that later on is gonna be a nightmare. And that's what, I've read a New York Times article or something recently on this, where companies are now hiring developers back to come in and fix the code that they had built by these tools. Because they thought, well, the promise was so exciting of like, oh wait, I don't need to hire a developer, I'm just gonna have it build this whole thing, but okay, but to what cost? What's that technical debt that was baked into it when it did that? So you mitigate that by building in smaller chunks or, consumable components of it. But you're also supervising it throughout the process. And you need someone that knows enough about it to say, well, that's not a good choice. How about if you just change these couple lines? And it's like, oh yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah, so would it be a fair statement to say, they may not be really good for demos and, that you want to share with other people outside of your organization, and it's better for product development for you to kind of brainstorm and go that route, so that you can build individual components versus like telling a full story?
Yeah, I don't think, I wouldn't use it for the full story. The full story can be made up of those components later on. But I think it's, even without AI, I was a big believer in building out components and modules and microservices. And you can do that with an application and piece by piece and slowly carve out the piece of the monolith to build them. I think you do the same concept here. You just have an AI guide along the way as you're doing it, and you don't just use it blindly, you're supervising it as it's doing those different pieces. And also, before you build it, you do need to spend a lot of time to give the guidance of, ideally, you can ask it what platform to build it on, but you should make the choice as to what platform it's going to be on. You should make the choice as to how big, what's going to be done here, what's going to be done elsewhere. Is it all going to be compiled in one piece? Is this going to be compiled separately? You need to be, someone needs to be providing that level of guidance to that, so that it's building it along the parameters of what you're trying to do.
Is that something you'd be willing to share, like your kind of pre-instructions before you start writing?
Well, I would redo mine. Again, I had the ones, I think I have it up on this, or part of it up on that slide, but I used AI to help create it and prompt it and whatnot, and I would go back and knowing what I know now, I would redo that completely. Because that was, hey, build me an application that does, the very fact that it said build me an application to do such and such was mistake number one. I would have said, I need a component that will do this, or I want a front end that will do this, and have it build each of those. So my entire prompt would have been fundamentally different from what I originally started with.
Yeah.
Could you ask AI to do the same thing? Say, here's the system that I want to build. And just start with, what are the microservices that I could use?
Yes, I would totally use AI as a guide throughout the entire process. Here's my vision. how would I build this out piece by piece? And then I would still take that and take a piece and say, okay, now I've got this piece, what's the prompt for building that piece? And scope that down to, very clear what are the inputs, what are the outputs, which, again, a lot of this is going back to fundamental product management, right? It's just like, okay, what exactly is this thing gonna do? What's gonna be the value? What's gonna be the output? How am I going to measure this as a file? It's all basic product management skills in the end.
So you have all your microservices now, let's say. You have Replit create all these different microservices,
Right.
testing them all, they work great. Now you want to stitch them all together into this agentic flow, right?
Yep.
That gives you your end application.
Right.
How do you do that? Is that you in an agentic workflow kit, defining which microservices get executed at which time, or is there an AI platform where you can just say, here's my microservices, give me the agentic workflow?
So there's not one with all the microservices. There's still not one master in the center. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is it could be a like in our my job right now. We have a product where we built these microservices, and we were going to talk about having an AI do it, and we're like, wait, we don't even need AI to do this. We know this has to happen, and this has to happen, and this has to happen. It's always going to happen in that order. It's always, here's the parameters, and we just built another service that just kicks those off and does that.
Right.
AI didn't even have to be involved. This or two of those services use AI, right? But the thing that's managing and calling those individual services was not AI. It was a programmatic thing, like do this, do this, do this. And then same concept. So this particular process only needs these three subcomponents. Within the next year or two, we're going to be in a point where you can tell an AI to do something like that, and it's going to know, okay, I'm going to call this MCP, this MC, those three things, you're letting it make that decision. If that's the type of thing where I may not need to do this, and I don't want to build all this like if-then logic, maybe AI is the right solution, but it's still not one that manages all of them. It just uses the components that it knows,
Sure.
and it should be limited to those and say, here's the types of components you should use. So it's not trying to do something over email when email is not relevant and germane to this topic. Okay. Well, I'm happy to answer other questions, but thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.